Hi, folks. So, often when I talk about contentious issues, there are cynical overtones. Um, but I would say this one is positive. This is a good story, something to be welcomed. Um, and I'll just read it. It's not excessively long, so please bear with me. Now, this is from September the 29th, so it's just over a week ago, and it's in the Times. And the reporter is Matt Dathan, and that's Datham, almost like my name, but a D instead of an N. Um, and yeah, I welcome this. I think it's good news, but there's a few talking points around it, so bear with me. Holding a view that does not subscribe to critical race theory as a protected characteristic under equality laws, a judge has ruled in what is believed to be a legal first in the UK. Sean Corby, an employee of the government's Workplace Conciliation Services (ACAS), took the organisation to employment tribunal after bosses ordered him to remove comments that he posted on social media that were critical of Black Lives Matter. Corby had written that critical race theory, an ideology that believes racism is entrenched in society and which is at the heart of the BLM movement, is divisive because it portrays white people as racist. He argued that a better approach to addressing racism was to follow the approach of Martin Luther King, who said that we should aspire to a day when people would be judged by the content of their character rather than the colour of their skin. Very reasonable position. Corby made the comments on Yammer, a workplace social media platform. Some of Corby's colleagues complained to ACAS's management that the comments were offensive and brought a grievance case against him. They claimed that he was using the Yammer platform to promote racist ideas and suggested he could be a member of a far-right group. They also said that they would not feel safe to be in contact with him and questioned his right to be employed by ACAS. ACAS dismissed their complaints, but instructed Corby to remove the posts on the grounds that employers had found them offensive. Corby had taken ACAS to an employment tribunal, claiming he had been unlawfully discriminated against and his views were protected under the Equalities Act, in the same way as his colleagues' views on critical race theory. Religion or belief are among 9 protected characteristics under the Equalities Act. I must admit I didn't know that. I didn't know actually the belief was protected under that, but it's good that it is. Because in a democracy you need to have a plurality of opinions allowed. Employment judge Kirsty Eyre, presiding over the case in Leeds this month, ruled in Corby's favour on the basis that he had given his beliefs careful consideration and much thought. As a result, she said his comments opposing Black Lives Matter and critical race theory fall under the religion or belief section of the Equalities Act. The ruling paves the way for the tribunal to consider in April whether Corby was unlawfully discriminated against by ACAS. Toby Young, General Secretary of the Free Speech Union, said the case was a significant victory for the cause of freedom of speech in the UK. An ACAS spokesman said, "We take pride in having a diverse workforce and have noted the tribunal's decision on one aspect of this case that is set to conclude next year. We value ACAS staff having a voice and our regular staff surveys continue to show that ACAS is an inclusive organisation." Okay, so this is very important actually. Credit to the judge in this case, she made the right call. I don't often commend judges, but she has made the right call. Um, and I also give Sean Corby credit for pushing through with it and not, letting these people intimidate him into silence. It's not so much ACAS. They were sort of between a rock and a hard place because they didn't. They actually dismissed the complaints at first, so they were taking a common sense approach. But they did tell him to take down his comments from the platform. The only thing I would say, if it was a workplace platform, I've never heard of it, Yammer, maybe it was a little bit reckless to put his comments there. Maybe knowing he had black colleagues, maybe that's a little bit reckless. But other than that, his views are completely legitimate and I think very moderate, but shows how detached woke ideologues are from reality when they suggest a man who is quoting Martin Luther King Jr., the figurehead of the civil rights movement in the United States, could be somehow in some far right group. It is deranged. Um, I've long felt that Black Lives Matter is a toxic group. It started off with good intentions. They wanted to hold accountability to police power, and they had legitimate issues around police brutality and um, police power in the United States, and I still think they opened up a useful debate about that. But unfortunately, they either got taken over by or were headed by basically anti-white racists. Um, and there's many examples of that. I think it's become a pretty vile organisation, and I think it should be seen for what it is. Now, Mr. Corby um, obviously felt the need to post this on Yammer. He probably should have done it on Facebook or something instead. But to be quite honest, even there, um, I mean, I've posted things about Black Lives Matter and nothing's happened to me, but it's kind of inconsistent because I've also been censored on Facebook. I think what actually happened was I was pushing back against someone who called me a racist. And I lost my temper and I said some rude things, but I said nothing that could be rationally, you know, seen as violating community guidelines, and they sanctioned me for a day. I had my profile taken down. So I am very wary of how these social media platforms, how consistent they are in applying standards. And I do think there is some degree of censorship against centrists and more conservative viewpoints, or even frankly against common sense viewpoints. Um, it's notable that Black Lives Matter still have their social media pages in full function, even though they're spreading hate basically against white people, all white people. And to those woke white activists, I say, if you want to flagellate yourselves in guilt, that's fine, but don't expect everyone else to. Um, but this is very important, and I think it's a good development because it paves the way that other such cases of unfair censorship will be tackled, and basically people will have the freedom to criticize critical race theory. Now, as it stands, I'm kind of a freelancer, um, but I'll be quite honest, and this is maybe a little bit personal, but I applied to join the Navy Reserves 2 years ago. Now, I haven't spoken about this extensively because I don't want to make it a bigger issue than it is, and I don't want to read too much into it. And I've got on with my life, but I was eventually rejected from service. I mean, I went through basic training, but there's a sort of final decision point, and they cited that I put down depression in my medical history because I had been diagnosed with clinical depression, and I don't think that should be a stigma. A lot of people in the country do have that. But I was honest about that, and that was the reason they cited, or rather, the third-party medical assessor, Capita. They cited that. Kappa is a company that's had a lot of complaints about them, but I digress. That's not what this video is about. People, they're a terrible company in terms of communication, and I still feel they knew this information early on. They could have just rejected me at the start. So, if I'm honest, I was a little bit resentful of the way that was handled. I think they could have just rejected me early on rather than go 5 months down the line. But anyway, I now wonder, was there more to it than that? The fact that I've got this channel, the fact that I am quite outspoken, I wonder, had someone in the armed forces maybe found this or found something I'd said online and quietly, I don't know, maybe someone in Capita or maybe someone in the Navy. Now, I have never said anything that could be rationally seen as racist or sexist or anything of the sort. Um, I have no evidence for that, by the way. I can't say that's what happened. I just wonder now, was it more than just a depression? Because if the armed forces are going to rule out everyone who's ever had depression, hell, there'll be lots of serving military personnel who've had depression. So I wonder now. I do wonder about that, but I have no evidence for it, so I can't. It's purely a gut feeling that there may have been more to it. But yeah, this is good news. Critical race theory should be challenged. It is a toxic ideology because it basically tells minority people that they're perpetual victims and all the struggles they have in life can be blamed on white people. It then puts white people on the defensive. It's toxic, and it's an American import. This was coined in the 1980s, I believe. I forget the academic's name now, but she coined it. in an American university and it found its way over here. It's poison, and it does absolutely nothing for anyone. This is not to say that racism doesn't exist in society. Unfortunately, it does, and it absolutely has to be robustly tackled. I mean, I think there has been evidence of racism in in police ranks, in army ranks. Those sort of things have to be tackled. Of course, they do. And it is right that Britain has developed into a more tolerant country, probably than we've ever been. But the tolerance isn't universal. There's now an intolerance towards opinions. Actually, it's become like we've advanced a lot in terms of racial equality, LGBT rights, and those sort of areas, or LGB rights. I think the T is a different issue, but the point I'm making here is that that's all good. There's been progress there, but there's actually been a growth in intolerance towards different opinions and towards people challenging hard left dogma, and it is hard left dogma. Um, so I just hope this case kind of sends out a message to those woke warriors that you can't destroy people, you can't crucify someone for having an opinion that you don't like, you know, for criticising a movement. I mean, the colleagues that felt they were unsafe to work with him, I mean, had he ever threatened them? Had he ever, you know, berated them? Um, if I was him, I'd be. This is actually something I've often thought about when you get these employment tribunals, even if someone wins a case. I wonder what the aftermath is. I mean, going back to that environment. Because he'll be going back to his workplace knowing full well he's won his case, but he's going to have to work with the very people that complained about him and, you know, wanted his blood. So I think it takes thick skin to go back into that atmosphere. And that's one thing about any workplace tribunal, actually. You know, someone wins a case over bullying or whatever it may be, they have to go back in that environment. So I often wonder about that. And some people might say, is it worth the fight? You know, would you rather not just change job or something? But here's the problem. Woke ideology is so entrenched in so many of our institutions now that anyone faces a risk for speaking out. If you work for any kind of government department or emergency services or any kind of official body and you have opinions, you need to be very careful. I personally think that people should have absolute freedom to have opinions, provided they're not threatening anyone online. But they shouldn't do it when they're in uniform or when they're officially representing something. But, you know, people might say, oh, well, they should be more careful because they're representatives of that company or that organization, whatever. But are we saying that people should suddenly lose the right to freedom of speech if they work for a particular company? I have a big problem with that. I would say as long as it's, you know, out of hours, as long as they're not officially representing the company, you know, it's their home time, I have a big problem with punishing them for basically having a viewpoint. Now, in this case, I think it was probably a bit naive to use a company platform, but that's it. What he actually said, assuming there isn't more to it, it's it's absolutely right that he won his case. Um, because these woke bullies, these woke totalitarians need to understand that they're not the only people in the universe allowed an opinion. And they have to understand that just because they feel passionately about something doesn't give them a right to basically violate someone else's conscience or conviction or views on something. It just doesn't. Honestly, in public discourse, the most intolerant people I can think of in recent times in the West has been woke ideologues on one hand, and then likes of MAGA extremists on the other. They're the most intolerant people I can think of in society, and they're two extremes. Anyway, this is a victory for common sense. It's a good thing, but it's a pity it had to get to that extent. I mean, ideally, it wouldn't have happened at all. He wouldn't have been told to take down the comments. And, you know, basically, what ACAS probably should have done is said, well, he has a right to freedom of speech unless he's threatening anyone or bullying anyone, i.e., specifically targeting a colleague, then it's freedom of speech. And if you don't like it, then change, they're the ones that should move. But criticising a political movement is not the same as, stirring up hostility towards black people, unlike Black Lives Matter, which does stir up hostility towards white people. It's a racist movement. May not start off that way, but it absolutely is a racist movement. Um, and I just think that at the moment the Tories are the only party. This was a court decision, it wasn't like Tory legislation. But at the moment, the Conservatives are the only major party standing up to woke extremism. They're the only one. Labour can't be relied on. The Lib Dems, Greens, and SNP certainly can't be relied on. Is it a vote changer for me? Not yet, but I will think very, very carefully about my vote next year. I don't like Tory sleaze, and I think there's a bit of an arrogance of being in power for 13 years, but they are the only party standing up to woke totalitarianism. And I don't think it's hyperbole to describe it that way. When you have people basically saying we want others to lose their job, or to be censored, or to be vilified because we don't like their opinions in that sense. I mean, what I would say is, by all means, condemn the opinion, say that you disagree with it, but it's a threat to someone losing their job, their livelihood, or um, being vilified for it in that sense. There's a lot of opinions I don't like, a lot, but that doesn't mean I say that person has no right to free speech. I mean, just to use an example, and I'll just round up with this. Bully XL owners, I've been pretty vocal about my thoughts on that. I think they're selfish idiots. I think that if they're head in the sand, I think they're selfish idiots. I think they're in denial about the obvious. But, I think they're absolutely, the ban should go ahead. But in terms of their actual right to say we disagree with this, our lovely little psycho is harmless, they have a right to be idiots. I stand by their right to be idiots. I stand by their right to make idiotic arguments. Because free speech isn't something we pick and choose, it's something for everyone, unless the only caveat is if there's threats or very specific bullying or possibly national security issues, and even that has to be looked at carefully. It can't just be an excuse. Yeah. Anyway, this is good news, and please Sean Corby won his case, but it shouldn't have come to that.